If you were to simply feminize my name, my birth name that is, you'd get something like Antoinette. Now, I didn't particularly fancy being named after a queen who is primarily known for having lost her head in a bloody revolution. So instead, I named myself after Eleanor of Aquitaine, a much more successful queen and an all-round badass female role model. It was only later that I also discovered this quote by Eleanor Roosevelt, which made me even happier that I had chosen the name. Quote, "When you adopt the standards and values of someone else or a community or a pressure group, you surrender your own integrity. You become, to the extent of your surrender, less of a human being." Having a poor sense of body image is par for the course with gender dysphoria. Society teaches us that if we shoot for physical perfection, we will be forever unsatisfied. Though I do think it would prefer if we did not learn that lesson and we kept on trying to buy our way out of this black hole. Contentment and learning self-love are so anathema to capitalism that it is practically a moral duty to practice them on a daily basis. Here's hoping I will prove a good example of that. Gender dysphoria is considered to be a medical rather than a mental condition in this day and age. But this does not mean by any stretch of the imagination that it's fun to live with. If I had to describe my daily experience, it is like getting up every day only to find that I've been mind-swapped into an alien being. In other words, it's disconcerting, debilitating, and likely to result in feelings of mortification. Compliments paid to me as a male-bodied entity fall on deaf ears. My physical form is an instrument I have never known how to play, a vehicle I simply have no knack for driving. Words of Susan Stryker, quote, "The transsexual body is an unnatural body. It is the product of medical science. It is a technological construction. It is flesh torn apart and sewn together again in a shape other than that in which it was born. In these circumstances, I find a deep affinity between myself as a transsexual woman and the monster in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Like the monster, I am too often perceived as less than fully human due to the means of my embodiment. Like the monsters as well, my exclusion from human community fills a deep and abiding rage in me that I, like the monster, direct against the conditions in which I must struggle to exist. I am not the first to link Frankenstein's monster and the transsexual body. Mary Daly makes the connection explicit by discussing transsexuality. She characterizes transsexuals as the agents of a necrophilic invasion of female space. To quote extensively from one letter to the editor of a popular San Francisco gay lesbian periodical, "I consider transsexualism to be a fraud and the participants in it perverted. The transsexual claims he or she needs to change his or her body in order to be his or her true self. Because this true self requires another physical form in which to manifest itself, it must therefore war with nature. One cannot change one's gender. What occurs is a cleverly manipulated exterior. What has been done is mutation. What exists between the deformed surface is the same person who was there prior to the deformity. People who break or deform their bodies act out the sick farce of a deluded, patriarchal approach to nature, alienated from true being. When an estrogenated man with breasts loves a woman, that is not lesbianism, that is mutilated perversion. This individual is not a threat to the lesbian community. He is an outrage to us. He is not a lesbian. He is a mutant man, a self-made freak, a deformity, an insult." When such beings as these tell me I war with nature, I find no more reason to mourn my opposition to them, or to the order they claim to represent, than Frankenstein's monster felt in his enmity to the human race. I want to lay claim to the dark power of my monstrous identity without using it as a weapon against others or being wounded by it myself. I will say this as bluntly as I know how. I am a transsexual, and therefore I am a monster. Words like creature, monster, and unnatural need to be reclaimed by the transgendered. By embracing and accepting them, even piling one on top of another, we may dispel their ability to harm us. A creature, after all, in the dominant tradition of Western culture, is nothing other than a created being, a made thing. The affront you humans take at being called a creature results from the threat the term poses to your status as lords of creation, beings elevated above mere material existence. As in the case of being called it, being called a creature suggests the lack or loss of a superior personhood. But I find no shame in acknowledging my egalitarian relationship with non-human material being. Everything emerges from the same matrix of possibilities. When I finally knew I had to abandon the pretense and become myself, I kept a reservation that I would never presume to tell a born woman that I was more of a woman than them, or assume that I ever could be. It must be conceded to radical feminism that the experience of growing up as a girl and the social expectations laid upon one from childhood, whether intentionally by parenting or by osmosis from society in general, are not equivalent to the experience of growing up with either the status or the covert knowledge of being transgender, though of course that carries its own stigmas and trials. To borrow a statement from Professor Germaine Greer, there's a hardship about being a woman. I always wanted to be a Jew, but I can't be. One can assume that Greer is making a distinction between Jewish as in ethnic identity and Jewish as in the religion, as it is indeed possible for a non-Jew to convert to the religion. Nevertheless, I think it's safe to say that Jewish people with a lifetime background in the culture and faith, their generational history and their knowledge would find it pathetic, if not downright offensive, if the enthusiastic convert then went about proclaiming they were more of a Jew than anyone else. The analogy is crude, and radical feminists will inevitably object that it is simply impossible for a man to convert to womanhood, except possibly by the definitions of the patriarchy. I have no real argument to that. However, I cannot deny that it has felt wonderful to be accepted as myself by the women at my place of work, and in experience terms, I can only compare that to the acceptance I have felt in certain faith groups, where my desire to join the group was accepted unconditionally and warmly in spite of my lack of understanding in the faith and my deficient knowledge of it. And I am under no illusions that it will always be the acolyte. I am a makeshift woman at best. It still feels better than being a dysphoric man.